Good evening and welcome to From the Stacks. We have, I- uh, excuse me for my technical failure here. I need to. Good evening and welcome to From the Stacks. Well, this is what happens when we have somebody who is just simply a technological failure trying to handle something like this. Well, the best I can do is just laugh at my difficulty here. This is what happens when we have. Well, my goodness, how can I not? There we go. All right. I guess I should be embarrassed, and I should apologize for putting you all through this. Welcome to From the Stacks for July 20 of 2021. Our subject tonight is the climate blame game. This is a study by the weather statistician and historian William M. Matt Briggs. He is a very fine scholar and has written a wonderful study that we are actually giving away free to those who donate any amount and ask for it as our way of saying thank you. Matt has done a superb job of explaining why the constant claims that human-induced global warming from the emission of what are called greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and other gases, methane especially, are not actually causing an increase in the frequency or the intensity of extreme weather events. It's a very common understanding that they are, that hurricanes are more frequent or more powerful, that floods and droughts are more frequent or more powerful, and so on in recent decades than they were in times past. Dr. Briggs has shown very clear statistical proof that this is simply not the case. And we are hoping that he will be able to log on momentarily and join us here to discuss this. Meanwhile, let me just simply remark that as our way of saying thanks, when you make a donation of literally any size and request it, we'll be glad to send you a copy of the Climate Blame Game. All you need to do is to go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, simply type in the comments field promo code 21-07 or the title Climate Blame Game, or both, and we'll know what you're looking for and we'll be glad to send it to you. As we hope that shortly Dr. Briggs will be able to join us on the program. There he is, wonderful. Matt, thank you so much. I apologize. I forgot to be in touch about a week ago to just firm up our plans. And so you have very graciously joined us literally at the last minute here.
I forgot too.
It very much.
I hope this is okay. I'm in the woods here on a little laptop with a low battery. I hope I last out through this.
Well,
apologies to everybody listening.
Last. Yeah.
I hope I can be heard.
It is my responsibility. All the fault is mine. But I thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So let's just dive right in. Since you have a little low battery, let's dive right in and get the most we can out of you. First, would you just tell our viewers a little bit of your own background? How is it that you, a statistician, came to write a study particularly on the relationship between human-induced global warming or climate change and extreme weather events?
Well, I got my start, one of my starts anyway, after the Air Force in doing meteorology and climatology, doing the thermodynamics, fluid flow, dynamical meteorology, all that kind of thing. And I became very interested in forecasting and what makes a good forecast. How do you tell? what does it mean
Uh-huh.
to be a good forecast? How do you differentiate between good and bad and all this kind of thing? And that naturally led me into statistics and probability, and the techniques there to judge good from bad models is the same for any kind of model. It doesn't have to be climate or anything like that, any kind of model. So, uh, of course, the global warming, global cooling, I guess we should say, hysteria first started back in the 70s when we were assured that the world was going to enter the next ice age imminently because of burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels were going to create enough pollution into the atmosphere, and this was going to knock back the sun's rays and cool the earth and plummet us into another ice age. This was the consensus, at least in the 1970s, when global temperatures were decreasing. Then they started increasing in the late 80s for a decade or so, and the theory switched to global warming. And they didn't change much of the theory. The theory was that, of course, burning fossil fuels was not going to, and the pollution wouldn't mean anything anymore. The soot and particles from burning fossil fuels wouldn't mean anything anymore. But this time, carbon dioxide was going to be the driver. It was going to trap the radiation, the long wave radiation that leaves the Earth, and this was going to warm the Earth irreversibly. Well, that didn't happen either. So they decided to start calling it climate change. And so that no matter what happened, they were covered. If it got cooler, well, that's climate change. If it got warmer, that's climate change. If it stayed the same, well, that's climate change too, because it could get warmer or cooler. And so they decided to start doing these. I saw the very opening there, these attribution studies. And, naturally I got involved in that because I wanted to see how can you really do this? Is it even possible? Notwithstanding the errors that many people make in these forecasts, is it even something that is scientifically plausible? And well, it is theoretically speaking, but it is not now, not at the state that our models are in.
Yeah, so you started out really testing the models using the principles, the laws of good statistics. And what did you find out about the reliability of the models? Maybe not so much on the cooling end, although I gather they all pretty well failed there since we didn't get the cooling. But what have you discovered in terms of testing the models that are being used now to forecast supposedly dangerous global warming from our burning of fossil fuels?
They stink. They're pretty bad. They just as before. They forecasted temperatures were going to be lower than they turned out. Now they're forecasting temperatures are going to be higher than they turn out to be. So it depends on what kind of model, what kind of climate model. There's all sorts of intricacies and so forth. Before global cooling hit, before global warming became and then it morphed into global warming, and that became sort of a celebrity cause. There was the idea that climate was out to the next month, 2 months, 3 months, those kind of things. Forecasting out for a month has some slight skill. Forecasting out for 3 months, maybe just a tiny little bit, in the sense that they can edge the prediction just a shade a little bit warmer or a shade a little bit cooler than the average. But that's about all they can do. The big models that they're relying on to proclaim our coming doom, well, those stink. They're routinely forecast temperatures far, far in excess of what we see. Uh, Future forecast, I should say. This is how they fool
Yes.
themselves. Everybody should understand this. There's different kinds of forecasts. There's what we call classically in statistics the model fit, which is where you fit the observed data that you have and the models that you have. You kind of fit these together and you try to make that fit as close as you can as possible. And they do a very good job with that. Well, anybody can, using any
Yeah.
set of data and any set of mathematical tools. But then you have the future forecast, the forecast of data that nobody has ever seen before. And those
Yeah.
forecasts, they do a pretty poor job of doing. So you were
Yeah.
mentioning at the beginning there's going to be increased hurricanes, all these increased terrible things.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't happened.
Our mutual friend Will Happer refers to that as curve fitting. And he points out, it's easy to fit a curve that you already know. All you have to do is enter the parameters until you get it. What's really tough is fitting the curve that you don't know yet, and that's where the real failures come on. One of the things that you point out in your study, the climate blame game, is that you're dealing in this primarily with what are called attribution studies. That is, studies that try to say, okay, how much of this extreme weather event that has just occurred, a flood, a drought, a hurricane, wildfire, how much of this would have happened naturally even if man-made global warming had never come about? And how much is left over that we have to explain by man-made warming? And you raise in your study the point that, frankly, we don't know and we cannot know how much would have happened naturally. Why is that?
Well, there's two things. The first thing they say before they begin these attribution studies is we know, for instance, that wildfires are going to increase. We know that tornadoes are going to increase. We know that hurricanes are going to increase in number and intensity and this kind of thing. Therefore, when one happens, it's only natural that we should blame it on, they don't call it global warming, as I said, anymore. They call it climate change. Well, that's just not true. None of those things have actually happened. I mean, forest fires are down. Tornadoes are down, hurricanes are down in strength and intensity. They have to reach deep into the numbers and manipulate them in all sorts of wild ways to try to prove that they're increasing in any way. So that just doesn't fit. The way these attribution studies work, though, is they first sort of assume that. And then they assume that, okay, let's assume we have a perfect model, an absolutely perfect model of the atmosphere. We're going to run it one time. Or many times, with the assumption that mankind doesn't exist or mankind doesn't emit any carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. Then we're going to run it a second set of times, assuming mankind does emit carbon dioxide and all this kind of stuff. And then they compare those results and they say, aha, in the results of the model where it says mankind is emitting more carbon dioxide, the frequency of these events that have just occurred, like a flood somewhere or a storm or whatever, is greater. Therefore, they say, we can attribute the storm that just occurred to climate change because our models have verified it. Well, it doesn't work that way. In order for that to be true, the models that they have to make and not only have to make good forecasts, they have to make perfect forecasts. They have to make perfect forecasts of the future, which they haven't done. They stink at it. So this is all just one model calling to another model, and each model trying to say each other is good by looking at each other. And then they take these two models and they say, boy, don't these two models look so well together? Therefore, we must have done something right, and we could blame everything that happens. Only bad things, never good things. Yeah, but like for where I am right now in northern Michigan, it's a beautiful, sunny, late, early evening. Well, we wouldn't want to blame that on climate change. No. This is just something that happens naturally. We can only blame bad events. So that's another built-in bias they have to their system. It's all rather absurd, but they get away with it because the math is so pretty.
Yeah, you used at one point there, you said that they will say that the model verifies something. And that just struck me as really strange in terms of scientific method, because it's models that have to be verified, right? I mean, models don't verify anything. Observations might or falsify a model, but models are not what's supposed to verify anything else, right? Have I got it wrong?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. All these verification studies assume they're conditioned on the idea that the models that they're using are perfect. Not just good or good enough or whatever. No, perfect. All the results that come out of them assume the models are perfect. And we know they stink. They just obvious that they stink. Otherwise, we would have everybody would have known about this by now, that they've actually made good predictions. And it's not just that they have to make good predictions, they have to make predictions better than what we call sort of naive predictions. So, for instance, a very common tactic in meteorology is to say you have to beat persistence. Persistence is a very easy forecast you can make. For instance, today, right here, right now, it's a sunny, beautiful, warm day. So today's sunny, beautiful, warm. I'm going to forecast tomorrow is going to be like today. That's a reasonable thing to say. So that's a model. That's a model. It's a very cheap, free, and easy model. Anybody could do it. So if I can't come up with a scientific model with all these equations and numbers and computers and all this kind of stuff that can beat this, it's said that I do not have skill. And right now, the climate models, these great climate models, these global, oceanic, atmospheric, coupled climate models run by the top minds in the field all over the world, can't beat persistence. They can't beat the idea that, well, here's the global mean temperature this year. I say it'll just be the same as next year. The next year will be the same as this year. That's a perfectly reasonable forecast. Those models can't beat it. These models have no skill. They can't be used. Therefore, they should not be used in making these attribution studies, because it's just nonsense. They're conditioned on stuff that just isn't so. So we should not believe these in any way.
Yeah, in your study, the climate blame game, are we really causing extreme weather? At one point, you cite something from Shannon Osaka and Rob Bellamy in a 2020 paper where they question, quote, the motivation of attribution studies, coming close to suggesting that they're often performed for propagandist purposes. What motives lie behind the attribution studies? What sort of propaganda? What's the point of this?
Mainly to publish papers and to be ahead of the consensus, to say, hey, look, I've proved what we all believe is true. Look, this really is going to be more dangerous. I've really shown that this thing that happened aligns with all the stuff that we really believe. So what these guys did, they did a very good job, is they looked at a certain event that happened, that really did happen, and they looked at all of the attribution studies that claimed how much was attributed to global warming. They were all over the map. Some said, oh, it was almost certain. Some said it wasn't. It couldn't have happened at all because of global warming. These things are all over the map because they're all using different models. There's not just one global climate model that these scientists use. There are actually several. There's a whole suite of them. And they have so many tunable parameters and different ways to insert observations and so forth that this is natural. And that's really a good thing. It's not a bad thing about studying how the atmosphere works. It's a bad thing when they try to use these things as propaganda to try to say, we say it's going to be bad, then our models, which say it's going to be bad, also say it's going to be bad. Therefore, because our models say it's going to be bad, it really is going to be bad. That's the kind of circular logic they're using with these things, and they use them in a propagandist sense. But mostly it's just scientists trying to get papers, and trying to get papers that sound real nice and everything like this. Because if you get a paper like this that say whatever the latest weather event, that untoward sort of weather event that just occurred, if you can get a paper blaming it on climate change, or blaming it on people driving their cars or trying to get food on the table for a living, why, then that sounds good in the media. It sounds good for the university. It helps them get grants and all this kind of thing. So that's the propagandist aspect of it.
Okay. I've heard a lot of different people on what you and I would call the alarmist side on this say, but look, clearly the dollar losses from extreme weather events are rising over time. I think Bill McKibben of 350.org has done this a number of times. I'm pretty sure he's one of the ones I've seen on video doing this. Is there a statistical correlation between climate change, let's specify an increase in global average surface temperature over the past, say, 60 years? Is there a statistical correlation between that and uh, dollar losses in property to extreme weather events.
Sure. Yeah. There was also the same kind of correlation in the 70s for dollar losses in property with global cooling. And for the very simple reason that population is increasing. From the late 50s or something, we had a third of the population that we have now. So the population's going up and up and up. Inflation is rising. How much does gas cost a couple of years ago compared to what gas costs right now? That has nothing to do with global warming. So if you're looking at all this, of course you're going to find a correlation because inflation is driving prices up. So this, and people are moving more and more to the coastal areas and so forth because they want to live by the ocean and have a nice life. And so when a hurricane hits, there's more people there. The houses are bigger. Inflation has driven the prices of all the lumber and everything used in construction of these houses up. So it costs more when a storm hits, even a
Yeah.
smaller storm. But that has nothing to do with an increase in frequency of storms or the climate changing. That just has to do with changes in behavior and changes in cost of the materials used to build these things. It's not a climate problem, it's an economics problem.
Yeah, as I would put it to some folks now, in 1969, my folks bought a house in Orange County, California for $36,900. I happened to look on Zillow at that one just about 2 weeks ago, and it was priced in Zillow at a little over $1.2 million. Uh, and I tell you, having grown up in that house, it is not it is not a mansion. It's far from a mansion. But what that means is that if some sort of storm had hit that house in '69, it would have qualified as $36,900 loss. And today it qualify as a 1.2 some million dollar cost, but it's the same house. So your inflation point is very important, and also the population growth. And we're just simply putting more property in harm's way. But is it Roger Pilkey Jr., I think, who's done a
Yep.
lot of work showing that in fact there once you control for population growth and growth in property in harm's way and for inflation, you actually have a decrease in in losses due to extreme weather events, especially a decrease in mortality rates in human deaths.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Well, that's
Yeah.
because of two very good things. Because we are getting very good at these shorter term forecasts, and the warning system is better, so people can take shelter easily. And building is just different. I mean, you compare a house built now in, say, Hurricane Central, compared with a house built in the 50s or 60s. Well, the construction techniques are entirely different. The houses built now are more likely to survive than the houses built, the average house back then.
Yeah.
So all of this plays in together. But if you look, instead of all this persiflage, you look instead, well, let's just count the number of hurricanes that we got, landfalling hurricanes and so forth. No, those are down. Okay, why don't we look at something simple like that? No, they try to obfuscate the matter by looking at all these strange statistical things. Nobody understands the economics of this, and it's easy to fool people with stuff. But if you look at just the raw numbers themselves, nothing is happening.
So let's get to some specific examples. Start with droughts. Have droughts worldwide or in the United States increased in number or intensity over the period from 1960 to the present, or for that matter, over the period from, say, 1800 to the present?
Not that we could tell, but on the other hand, land use and agricultural practices have changed. So again, it's the same kind of idea. If you have a lot more agriculture in an area and that area suffers drought, even if the drought is less frequent than in times past, it will have more of an influence. That's all. So that's a land use problem. That's something you could solve in other ways. That's not drought. Drought itself, you look at the actual numbers in the regions and so forth. No, it's not increasing as far as we can tell. Not everybody recorded all these things in times historical as well as we record things now. That's another huge problem we have in all of these attribution studies, is that now in everything from medicine, as we saw in the coronavirus panic, to global warming and everything. Now everything is recorded instantly everywhere and broadcast if the least deviation occurs. So everything is made to seem more important than it
Yeah.
historically was.
Now, I want you to put your meteorologist's hat back on and just answer this. Uh, I've read in some places that actually colder periods are more likely to produce drought than warmer periods because there's less evaporation and therefore less cloud formation and therefore less rainfall. Uh, Over the centuries, uh, does the history of weather bear that out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can compare in California now the El Nino versus La Nina periods where there's less and more moisture and that kind of thing. So, absolutely, it's as simple as that. I mean, there's all kind of complications due to exact geographic region and predominant winds and all this kind of stuff. So, if you're in Saharan Africa, that kind of thing, so you have to take into consideration these long-standing unalterable geographic factors that we all have to live with. But yeah, that's just
Uh-huh.
exactly it. And cold is deadlier, of course, than heat. If heat was deadlier than cold, then my parents wouldn't move from Michigan every summer down to Florida in the winter to try to to run to the heat. So no, it's just not
Yeah,
the case. Global warming
yeah,
is, you're not supposed to say it, but of course it's to be welcomed, especially when we're in an
yeah.
interglacial period right now, and one of these long-standing changes of the Earth's climate due to orbital mechanics that are somewhat
Mhm.
obscure and so forth. So yeah, bring on the warmth. Things do better in the warmth than they do in the cold.
Yeah. What did global warming, particularly man-made global warming, which basically the adherents of the idea say we could trace back, say, from 1960 onward. What did that have to do with the recent, really amazing heat wave in America's Pacific Northwest, Canada's Pacific Southwest?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. I mean, it happens. It wasn't the hottest time ever. You gotta see a guy named Steve Goddard, also called that's his nom de plume. Also, Tony Heller is his real name. He he
Yeah.
has a lot of fun with these guys. He looks at all the old headlines. He's got all these archives and stuff like that. Media now saying, "Oh, it's the warmest ever. It's the warmest. This is a heat." He goes back and looks. Well, no, actually, back in the 20s or 30s or 40s, it was either hotter or colder or something like this, and they're just blowing it out of proportion. These media people go back and look at the records that they have, which go back, a couple of dozen years at best, and they compare it against that or something. So it's all absolutely overblown. I mean, sometimes there's heat waves, sometimes there's cold waves. That's just the way the
Yeah.
weather behaves. It's
Mm.
nothing unusual. What's unusual now is, again, this cannot be underplayed. People don't usually point this out, but our insistence of looking at every single thing that happens moment by moment and broadcasting that to the world as if it were hyper important. We're not going to stop doing it, but we should stop doing it. But since we're not going to stop doing that, people need to understand not to pay attention to these things, not to give it any credence or listen to these people who are trying to get a reaction out of you for every single little thing that happens. That's just absurd. That's madness.
Yeah. Yeah. It really puzzled me while that heat wave was going. We were breaking temperature records in the Pacific Northwest, mainly, by the way, in urban areas, which means that anywhere from about 1 to 7 degrees or so of that record-breaking gap would probably be explained simply by urban heat island effect. But we were breaking temperature records by, say, 10, 12, 14 degrees compared with the fairly short term records. Longer term, it turns out we actually have had some warmer times in these places. But then we were blaming this, 10, 12, 14 degrees difference in temperature on a global increase in temperature since 1960 that might be around about half a degree.
Or less.
How
It
does that work?
depends. Because they're nuts. They want to blame any particular event that the media notices on, well, now climate change. But don't forget, you're saying since the 60s, but this is cheating. You see, because the temperature from the 40s down to about, I don't know exactly the year, but 78, 79, the temperature decreased. So if you pick a time from the 60s, we're at kind of a low point. And of course, if you compare a low point with a point that they were in the aughts, the 2000s or something, well, we're higher. Okay, temperatures did get higher, so it makes it look. Oh wow, look at all this. That has to be because of mankind. Well, what caused the decrease from the 40s to the 70s? Well, that has to be a mankind too. So there's no way to win in this kind of thing. So no, you can't just do that. You have to, and we only have records reliably, direct records back a century at best in the Pacific Northwest, even less in most places. You have a few areas that have them. Meanwhile, you have to go back to more unreliable ways that people measured temperature and so forth. And then there's a built-in uncertainty with that. You don't know whether the number somebody recorded way back when using something that's not a mercury thermometer as we have now or other types. Is that exactly what we would have said now? So there's all this plus and minus, all this uncertainty that just disappears in the rush to sort of take credit, if you like, for the bad news. That's something we just adore doing, taking credit for bad news.
Yeah, I just finished a couple of weeks ago reading John Christie's new book. The title is not exactly this, but it's basically, has my hometown of Fresno warmed over the last 50 years or something like that? And what he goes through, and I don't think there are many people who are more careful with climate data, weather data than John Christie. What he goes through to try to establish a credible temperature record for just Fresno, one town in California, is simply astounding. I was really awestruck at the care that he takes to do that. And even when he's finished with all of that, he tells you the uncertainties still remain very large. So we cannot have the degree of confidence, the degree of certitude that so many of these folks express. Just a reminder for our folks who are tuned in, our guest tonight is Dr. William M. Matt Briggs. Matt is known as the statistician to the stars. He is a meteorology statistician, long background in that from his days in the Air Force and then following that. And he's written a wonderful study called The Climate Blame Game. Are we really causing extreme weather? And during the month of July, as long as our supply stays with us, we will be glad to send you a free copy of this as our way of saying thanks when you make a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size and request it. All you need to do is to go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments section, just simply write in promo code 21-07 or the title, The Climate Blame Game, and we will gladly send you a copy. But be sure to do that before the end of July. This offer ends at the end of the last day of July. Also wanted to mention to you the guest that we will have next week is Dr. David Kreutzer. David Kreutzer is an economist, formerly with the Heritage Foundation, now with the Institute for Energy Research. And he's going to be talking about the Biden-Harris net zero climate agenda, which I call a roadmap to a dead end. Not a good way to go. He's going to measure that and put that under very careful economic evaluation for us. He's written a good study on that. So we're going to be talking with David about that next week. I hope that you will tune in for that. Right now, though, let's get back to Matt Briggs. Matt, we've just I asked you whether droughts have increased during the period of allegedly man-made global warming. All right, how about hurricanes? Up in number, up in intensity?
No.
How about tornadoes?
I mean, they've looked at basins all over the world. Indian Ocean Basin are, the most interesting ones to us, of course, are the North Atlantic, the ones most likely to affect the United States. So no, I mean, they've come up with, they said, well, it can't be because we've said there's going to be more. So they start looking at obscure mathematical derivations of some of the observational parameters to show that, well, maybe, they really are worse than we thought they were going to be. But the answer is no. Just no. I mean, it's not even disputed that it's no. That's the problem. But you have the actual scientists who do this, and they know it's no, and you have the people who want to push their agenda. They might know it's no too, but they know that it's going to increase. They just know it's going to increase. Therefore, that's the same to them as it already has increased. So they don't feel that they're lying when they say that they have increased, because they know it's going to. So it's the same. So that's what you have to look out for.
All right. Tornadoes?
No.
Same story?
Same story. But tornadoes, too, this is another one of these problems. Population has increased. We spot more and more, especially the small ones, the ones that, are often Farmer Fred's field that nobody is being influenced for except for poor Farmer Fred. Nobody, is hurt by these small ones and stuff like that. But now we see them. Now we count them. So it looks like, because of this observational bias, again, that we have, that in some cases it might be like this. But in times historical past, hurricanes, only the major ones that reached shore or happened to intercept a ship were counted. And the same thing with tornadoes. Only the big ones that happened to kill people or cause damage, sadly, were counted. So the other ones were just missed or not counted, or maybe were recorded in somebody's journal, but they weren't recorded in any kind of a systematic fashion as we do now, minute by minute, with all these radars that we have.
Yeah. We had former National Hurricane Center Director Neil Frank on the program with us early this year to talk about the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season, which supposedly was the worst on record, the highest number of storms and so on. And he pointed out partly that back prior to the 1950s anyway, for the most part, most hurricanes that just stayed out in the ocean never got recorded at all because nobody saw them. And now we have satellites. In the 50s we had storm chasing planes and could fly out over the ocean and see these things. And so now we see everything that happens.
Any little tropical depression that a radar or a satellite once picks up with the wind speed exceeding the parameters that they call it a tropical storm, then they give it a name, and then it makes the press. And all of a sudden, storm numbers are up, even though nobody in the world is affected, not even the big ships that pass through these things. So it's absurd. It's the same problem we have in everything. I'm sorry to keep harping on this. Everybody should know this. Everything now is being recorded at these record rates, not just meteorology, climatology, but medicine, everything. And we have this enormous observation bias with the coupled with the desire to paint everything as worse than it is, that drives us all absolutely insane.
Yeah. Neil pointed out that if you applied the same definition to a tropical storm or to a hurricane, such that you determined whether to name this storm in the same way we did, say, in the 1990s and before, 2020 turns out to be not the most active season on record, but well behind 1933, which is a long time before so-called man-made global warming had any significant impact. You just made some reference to uncertainty. Um, why is that such an important concept in this whole discussion?
Oh, this is crucial because everybody's presenting their numbers as if they're fixed. This is it. This number here is a scientific certainty, and anybody who doesn't acknowledge it is a denier. You're a denier if you don't say it. No, all of these numbers come with plus and minuses. All right. And when you're comparing one number that has a plus and minus with another number that plus and minus, you have to essentially double the plus and minus to say if there's any difference between the two. And so, especially when you go back in the historical record, when these plus and minuses get bigger, 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 and bigger, we don't know what to say about how do we compare things that are happening now with then. And so we ignore all this uncertainty for the most part, just plain ignore it. Because a lot of times, even scientists don't know how to incorporate it. They don't know how to use this uncertainty. So when they're trying to go back and discern, say, temperatures from tree rings or something like this, that's a model. Okay, it's a model that says, well, if the tree ring was like this, the temperature was here. If the tree ring was like that, the temperature is over here, and so forth. That all comes with a substantial plus and minus. Now, if you feed that temperature that you've derived from this proxy into any other kind of algorithm, ethically and scientifically, you should bring that uncertainty that you have with it. But almost always they strip it out. It's gone. It's out of there.
Hmm.
And so everything downstream, all the analyses downstream that you see where they say it's getting worse or, we have to do something, they've completely removed all of this uncertainty from it. And that is just terrible because we don't know as much as they say we know. And that's been proven by their models failing. So uncertainty is crucially important. I mean, that's my entire, if you like, that's my entire research focus in my life is trying to understand how we underestimate uncertainty, not just in climate, but in medicine and physics and all kinds of scientific areas.
Yeah. I remember you and Jay Richards, a friend of mine, co-authored a book on the coronavirus and the COVID pandemic and so on, and how all of the government responses to that depended on efforts to understand the virus that just fell so far short of any clarity and certitude. And yet the government policies came out as if all this was absolute known truth. So, yeah,
Yeah, and
tough.
now they're saying this is New Zealand is saying this is the only source of truth. The government, our government is saying that you have to say what we say is truth, or we're going to cancel you. The book is The Price of
Yeah,
Panic. It's also with
right.
Jay, as you said, Jay Richards, and also Doug Axe, who is the biologist
Yeah,
of this. And my
yeah,
the what I contributed is the same idea. We rely on all these models that all these experts have created. These experts have absolutely no shame in saying that what they believe is going to be certainly true, and that we can only make decisions on what they say are true because they're experts. Well, it doesn't matter if their models have been failing abysmally everywhere. They're still experts, and they want you to still like
yeah,
their models because you should still like them. So we've reached a really ridiculous point where I like to say, at least with the corona, I call it the corona doom. Experts have pretended to forget everything they knew about viruses in this mad rush to impose all these solutions, which, of course, we all know now uh, were anything but.
have not solved much. Yeah, yeah. What you're saying reminds me of something that T.S. Eliot once wrote. He asked, "Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information?" And it seems to me that part of what you're grappling with is the fact that we've got this information overload, vast, vast, vast amounts of observations from all over the place, but we've lost our capacity to evaluate, to have a sense of proportion about these things. We'll every storm that hits somewhere is unprecedented, even though it's not. Uh,
Exactly.
what is it? Now I'm going to ask you to try to be a psychologist or a sociologist. What has happened to human society, especially in the United States, that makes us so prone to make this, I think, very basic error?
There isn't just one thing. There's many things. We've become exceedingly more effeminate. We demand to be protected from the least threat, let alone the least realistic, harm. That's one thing. Experts, the hubris of experts is another.
Hmm.
Their word is supposed to be bond because they're experts, and we're not allowed to question them. Uh,
Yeah,
and people are demanding that the government keep them safe from all of these things, and so the government naturally is going to
yeah,
respond and say, "Okay, yeah, we will. We'll do what we can," because that's just the way the world works. So it's and of course the media is leading this. They're loving all this. They did very well out of all of these. They did very well out of the global warming panic, especially during the 90s
yeah,
and the 2000s, and they did very well out of the corona doom panic because they want you to feel this pressure. They want you to feel, that you have to respond right now, and they're just pushing, pushing, pushing. The best thing if we did, and I'm sorry to say another thing is what we're doing right now. This technology, if for instance there was not this technology, there was not Zoom and whatever this thing is we're using here, there would have been no pandemic if the experts and the rulers did not have recourse to Zoom and all these other tools at their disposal that allowed them to keep doing their jobs, most of which for very little use or value, uh, they would have had to, of course, like all the rest of us slobs, go into the office and so forth, and therefore they would not have called for these drastic measures that they did call for, because those drastic
hmm,
measures hurt them not at all. So technology has also softened us, at least at the
yeah,
top. So all of these things
hmm,
together make it so that we just they push all the right buttons in all of us. And the best
yeah,
thing you can do, the easiest thing you can do, not the complete solution, is to shut the news off. Don't listen to anything the news says. Those people, it doesn't matter if they call themselves they're on the right or the left. Don't listen to the news, because the news is just trying to drive people's eyeballs and ears immediately. And if
yeah.
you can shut that off, then you're going to do a great service to yourself.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book that came out in the 80s called "The Good News Is the Bad News Is Wrong," and the author, whose name escapes me at the moment, pointed out that in the news media, the saying is, "Bad news is no news. Good news is pardon me. Bad news is good news. Good news is no news." Because for some strange psychological reason, people are much more attracted to stories about disasters than they are to stories about wonderful things. And if you're trying to pay the bills for your newspaper or your evening news program or whatever, you have to sell advertising. And advertisers want to know that they're going to get eyeballs. So you have to emphasize the bad news and ignore the good news on all sorts of things. It's part of why we can have rising life expectancy at the same time that people are convinced that, oh, our health has gone to hell in a handbasket. handbasket. We can have increasing living conditions, larger and better equipped homes, decade by decade, and yet people think that somehow or other we are worse off than our ancestors were. You mentioned the fear of being put to any sort of risk, and you it reminded me of a story that I heard about an elderly man in his 80s who went into a restaurant during the lockdown periods, which in some places continue even today, and the hostess said, "Sir, you have to wear a mask." And he said, "I'm not going to wear a mask." And she said, "Well, at your age, aren't you afraid of COVID?" And he looked at her and he said, "Miss, I fought in the Korean War." And she didn't get it. But he's saying,
That I
look, there
believe.
are risks and there are risks. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be afraid of this one, not having fought in the Korean War. So, yeah, I think we do have a population that is, in many ways, very, very fearful. And actually, a biblical passage, quite a number of different biblical passages deal with this. But Jeremiah 5 has been one of my favorites on fears about environmental risks, because in that chapter, God actually tells the people of Judah, you are afraid that drought is going to destroy your crops. If you feared me, you wouldn't fear that. And I think one of the things that's happened to our populace is we've lost the fear of God, and we've wound up with all kinds of irrational fears instead. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. That's another big reason why we become so effeminate. I mean, Christianity, sad to say, is no longer the dominant religion in America. I mean, a lot of people may say they're Christians. Perhaps it's a bare majority, but those that practice or think about it or hold what we might think of as orthodox views are certainly not in the majority. And that is definitely part of it. There, I mean, think about what happened in the Corona doom panic. Immediately, all these
Yeah,
churches moved to close. We can't dare have people worship. That would be the worst thing we could do, to pray to God and have. Well, what does that say? That says I don't really believe in God or God's powers or God's protective abilities, or I don't really believe in life after death and all this kind of stuff. So I mean, not stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that I firmly believe in. I firmly believe is absolutely true. But for the majority of us, I think we've lost that, and so it's natural that we're sort of floundering around, a lot of us, trying to find a new religion to replace what we used to know. So there's no fear of God. There's now just fear of death. That there's just an irrational fear of death,
yeah,
because people believe that
yeah,
this is it, and anything is going to get them at any moment, and so that they're not
yeah,
able to reason themselves beyond that position, and they don't have any hope or comfort beyond that. And if you're going to put your hope or
yeah,
comfort in science or experts, well, we've seen what they can do, which is not much. This is not the place to place your hope.
yeah. Rodney Stark, the sociological historian, in his book, The Rise of Christianity, pointed out that one of the things that contributed very heavily to the rapid growth of Christianity in the Roman Empire in the second and third and fourth centuries was that Christians who believed in the resurrection of the body therefore didn't have the kind of fear of death that their pagan neighbors had. And so when some epidemic would come through, the pagan neighbors would actually ostracize those who got sick. They would stay clear of them. They wouldn't try to minister to them in any way, and that in
Are you
itself
talking about
raised a
ICUs? I'm sorry, it's a joke.
uh,
I'm making a very bad pun, but you
oh
see, in your
yeah,
story, it's exactly the same.
yeah,
It's exactly the
yeah,
same. Now we couch it
yeah,
in scientific language now, but the story is the
right.
same.
But what happened there was these early Christians, because they didn't fear death, they would go and minister to the sick. They would take them food, they would take them water, they would cover them with blankets, whatever. This was obviously not high tech medicine like what we have today, but the result was that those sick people had a much lower mortality rate than the ones who were ignored by all the pagans. And so many of them converted to Christ just by seeing the love of these people and the fearlessness that they showed in the face of possibly imminent death. And one of the things that just really grieved me with the way that so many churches responded to the coronavirus pandemic was that they didn't show that fearlessness. They closed their doors. They kept their people apart. And That's the exact opposite of what we who believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting out of the Apostles' Creed should be showing. We should be showing courage in the face of such things.
Absolutely,
Matt,
absolutely. Not only did they close the church, they did so eagerly, even
yeah,
sort of happily in some cases.
yeah,
That they were
yeah,
joining in some kind of a weird health festival. And don't forget, we wouldn't have these hospitals, of course, without the Christian influence. The hospitals
exactly.
originated because of this reason, and now they've sort of
Yeah,
lost their
yeah.
way, like everything else.
Well, Matt, we've just barely touched the surface of your study, the climate blame game here, and it's something that I would so much love for many of our listeners to read and share with their neighbors, because you just simply you put the kibosh on all the claims that global warming, climate change is causing more frequent or more intense extreme weather events, even wildfires. There's the wildfires numbers and area consumed back in the teens, the 20s, the 30s of the 20th century, right, were much higher than what we see today with so-called record-breaking fires. They just can't even begin to be compared. So you've done, I think, a masterful service here. Um, would you have? We're coming down to the last couple of minutes. Would you have parting words for our listeners? Uh, Wisdom for them, how to live in this age that seems to be driven so much by irrational and fearful psychologies.
Try. Uh, there's no one thing that you could do besides, you could pray, you could try to make yourself a better Christian for those who are. But anybody else, try to remove yourself from the day to day, this frenzy that they're always trying to invoke and successfully invoke. Turn off the media. Read old books. Read old history books. See that what people have gone through before is not that different
Yeah,
than what we're going through now. We have to remove ourselves from the idea that we're in some kind of unique position. In some cases, we always are. Every culture is. Every situation is true. But the stuff that's happening to us is not. And that's what we really need to understand. It's not
yeah,
that bad. The stuff we do to ourselves is bad. Absolutely. The way we're tearing ourselves
yeah,
apart, that's bad. What the weather's doing, what a few random bugs are doing to us, that's not as bad.
yeah. Matt, where can people follow you online?
The best place is I have a website, wmbriggs.com. Pretty much everything I
Yeah,
have is there.
yeah. And you treat quite a variety of different subjects. I've been there a lot and always find new stuff there. What tell us some of the things that you pay attention to the most.
Oh,
Uh,
church matters, but that's not the biggest thing I do. Basically, science, philosophy of science, any type of philosophy of epistemology and so forth.
yeah,
Whether you see right there, there's I've been doing the Corona Doom panic since the beginning. Any
yes,
kind of thing that's making the news and that's related to over certainty in science. Well, you can see there's the election stuff that we went through, and so on.
yeah,
So anything in that matter and along those lines, I do. Um, that's it. Culture wars coming to an end. All those kind of things where we learn to think about how to think about stuff. That's what I do.
yeah. I just find it a fascinating website, wmbriggs.com. And I would urge our viewers to go there and just get educated. It's a great place to be. I loved your recommendation that people should read old books too. C.S. Lewis, in his introduction to a New English translation of Athanasius's on the incarnation of the Word, recommended reading old books. I think he said you should read one old book for every two new ones. And if you didn't have time for that, maybe just read only the old books, because the old books have stood the test of time, and you never know if the new ones are going to be worthwhile. So I think that's a great idea. The old books can help us to identify the blind spots in our own particular time. It would be great if we could read the books of 100 years from now, in the future. They would show us what our blind spots were, but they're not around. So if we want to identify our blind spots, we have to read the books of the people who had different blind spots, but not the same ones that we have. So I think that's a great admonition too. And among those old books that I would urge people to read would be the writings of the early church fathers. Just amazing, wonderful things. So Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I'm sorry I failed to remind you, so we caught you literally last second to bring you on here. Delighted that your low battery laptop survived all the way through the program tonight. So thanks very much.
It's blinking red now. We just made it.
All right.
It's blinking red now. We just made it. But thank you for having me.
All right. Take care and good night. Folks, again, our guest next week will be Dr. David Kreutzer, talking about the Biden-Harris net zero climate agenda. The Biden administration wants America to make emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases amount to net zero. That is, to balance emissions and removal of GHGs by 2050. But the Paris-based International Energy Agency, established in 1974 under the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development following the 1973 oil crisis, with the purpose to ensure that oil supplies remained secure, has now gotten on the global warming bandwagon and is trying to help countries decide to stop using oil and other fossil fuels. And it has published a study called Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. And the report, according to Dr. Kreutzer, is even though it purports to explain how countries can reach net zero by 2050, actually the report, if you dig into the numbers, shows that the Biden-Harris plan is a complete loser for Americans. Americans will be much worse off if indeed this plan is implemented. So this week, Dr. Kreutzer, this week, that is next Tuesday, joins us to critique the plan. I hope that you will tune in again then on either Facebook or YouTube to follow us there. One last reminder that to the end of July, as long as our supply lasts, we would be delighted, as our way of saying thank you, if you, when you make a donation of literally any size, to send you a free copy of Matt Briggs's The Climate Blame Game, Are We Really Causing Extreme Weather? All you need to do to request your copy is go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, write in promo code 2107, 21-07, or the title, Climate Blame Game, and we will be glad to send you a copy. One last apology here. Sorry for my clumsiness at the beginning of the program. I am not a tech-savvy person, but I hope that we provided